So we can talk you through a little bit of our experience here in London, in Euston, which is the area in which the regeneration project over the next 20, 30 years is taking place. If we look at the next slide, then we can see the sort of geographical area that we're talking about. There's a series of, it's an international transport interchange area. And there's been train stations being built and developed and regenerated in this area for hundreds of years. Our university is based just above King's Cross, just to the north of King's Cross station. Then we've got St Pancras Station, which is the international terminal. And then this neighbourhood, Somerstown. Somerstown is one of the neighbourhoods and one of the communities that we've been working with for over 7 years, working to address some of the challenges that the residents of this area face, because Camden, which is the part of London, the borough of London that we're located in, has quite wide inequalities. So here, the people that live in Somerstown and in Regent's Park Estate on the other side of Euston Station experience some of the worst outcomes in terms of health, employment, and education compared to other parts of the UK. They're in the top 10 percentile of the deprivation indices. So we've been looking at what participatory art and design can contribute to improve health, well-being and outcomes for the people that live in these areas for quite a long time. The red symbol here, HS2, that's where the new regeneration is going on. And the communities that are impacted most by this regeneration are the communities of Regent's Park Estate in the west and Somerstown in the east. With all of this regeneration and redevelopment, there's lots of visions for what the area would be and what it should mean. Is it a knowledge district? Is it going to be a new Palo Alto, a digital innovation quarter? Is it going to be a social innovation quarter where we can use the knowledge of the institutions around the area to address some of the global challenges that we face? Meanwhile, there are many people that live locally that have their own stories and their own perceptions of what matters and what their identity is locally. And if we look at the next slide, then we can start to talk about the approach that we've taken to try and work with the people that live locally to uncover some of this. So our ambition is to use participatory art and design approaches to work alongside and work with the people that live in these neighbourhoods to uncover some of their stories and some of their goals. And I'll hand over to Mick to talk about how we brought together what we call a community of practice of artists and designers that may want to get involved in this work locally.
As Adam said, we convene practice, and before I go into what that entailed, I think it's important for us to say that in terms of the Euston pilot, to actually facilitate a bottom-up process, truly bottom-up process, as much as one can. This has been absolutely at the core of. It's been a key to the whole strategy. So what we did was we've mapped basically two major communities plus things in between, or people in between. And the two major communities are within CSM, Central St Martin's, the University of Arts London. It's practitioners across, as Adam said, fine art, design, and actually architecture as well. And we were focusing upon practitioners who were socially engaged. And the thing that was quite interesting for us was we were able to actually map a series of practices plus quite a range of differences between basically the fine art practices being much more qualitative, on the other end of it, architectural being much more quantitative, and both approaches having real advantages For example, fine art tended to be able to convene a community and engage a community. Data was coming out of some of the other practices much more. So anyway, on the screen at the moment is the aspects really of what the canvas has thrown up. We were using a common canvas, which was pretty much mapping what's on the left, certain perspectives of the world, methods, approach, types of work, practice, etc. And these have been now poured into other ways of understanding. We've used the data to understand the community in different ways. The other community we were mapping was the knowledge quarter, which is basically the area around Euston and HS2 is a very intense, rich area of higher education institutes, community organisations, research institutes, libraries. It's quite extraordinary. And that, we hope, is going to be coming online quite shortly with T-Cycle 2. Our research fellow, Ailey Hattonskog, has used this software to make us understand what's going on much more. The thing that's the great boon for this is actually to be able to draw, well, for one thing, actually understand who's there, what do they do, but also draw on the experience that they have. This is, I think, absolutely crucial in terms of trying to put strategies together. Do you want to come back on that one, Adam?
Yeah, I can do. So
is that one you?
Really what this one shows is this is just, once you've got the community of practice mapped out there, so really this is just understanding who is it that we've got within our community of artists and designers that have different methods and approaches that they can use to get closer, to build relationships and to elicit stories from other people. In this case, the residents of those neighbourhoods that we were talking about in Regent's Park Estate and Somerstown. And so these are specifically some of the people within the community of practice that have different approaches to story gathering. And then as we move through, we'll share with you a couple of examples of the different approaches and the different practices that have been used around Euston. So these are some of the people that we're talking about and some of the activities that we've engaged with, but we'll go into that in a little more detail around exactly what happened to elicit stories around identity and history. Important for us is that we've got our community of practice inside the university, and some of these people have good relationships and sort of long-standing relationships with the communities in the local area and the residents in the local area. But we always, in the work that we've been doing around Euston, work through and with other organisations that have been there longer. I personally have been working in Somerstown for 7 years with many of the groups that are located there. But here, the People's Museum of Somerstown, so Diana Foster and Esther Leslie, they're residents that have lived there for a long time, and they've been leading a history club and now a People's Museum. And so the work that's being delivered around surfacing stories and surfacing narratives around identity and heritage is being led by the People's Museum of Somerstown, and they provide a collaborative opportunity for some of our community of practice to bring different approaches for engagement and elicitation of stories to this group. And so if we take another look at some of what that means in specific practice, then on the next slide we see that in Somerstown we've got the work of Gilbert Bays. So this is locally in the social housing that surrounds the area. The social housing was heralded as some of the most significant when it was first introduced a couple of hundred years ago by about 100 years ago, by Basil Jellicoe. And Reverend Basil Jellicoe said that it's more than houses. It's about relationships. It's about fostering community, not just giving people the basic roof over their head. And as part of this intervention, what Basil Jellicoe did was commissioned this artist, Gilbert Bayes, to come up with what are referred to as the Bayes finials. These finials are ceramic sculptures that were sitting atop washing line poles. The idea being that you'd have art in everyday life. And these sculptures tell stories and carry stories, some of them religious, some of them folklore. And of course, the populations in these areas have changed. And now the museum is interested in working with some of the new groups of residents to find out what some of their stories are that they would like to visualize through these kinds of ceramics and to see in everyday life in the surrounding neighborhood. Part of this, if we look at the next slide, our colleague, so this is the finials in use back in the day with the washing lines in place, the finials in place. The idea was that by doing this in a circle, people would be able to see each other, talk to each other. What's happened is some of these finials have been stolen because they're quite high value ceramics now, and they've turned up as far away as New York, selling for $10,000, $20,000. In fact, a couple of the finials that are models of tailors, a tailor and his apprentice, they've just been bought in New York by the History Club and the People's Museum and returned. This theft of these artworks has been understood as a metaphor for the theft of public goods for private profit and private benefit. And so the museum itself is very much relevant to the context of development in terms of maintaining what it refers to as working class heritage and working class narratives in the face of gentrification and development. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see the work that our colleague from our community of practice has been doing. Elizabeth Wright and her digital markers project, she has a process of photogrammetry where with the museum convenes some of the History Club members and other residents that live in the area that are interested in understanding a bit more about the heritage and also sharing their own stories of their experiences of when they could remember all of these finials were here, some of them. Some of them can remember when some went missing. There are different stories that people share as they walk around these sites and use digital devices to take 3D scans of the models themselves. And then also they can then take these scans, work on them digitally and create, as we'll see in the next slide, a 3D archive of some of the pieces that have been lost and some of the pieces that remain. So it's through the practice of walking, scanning, sharing, synthesizing, bringing together. It's alongside this practice, the stories emerge about people's experiences of these artworks and their memories of the places in which the artworks are situated. And the History Club and the People's Museum are the holders of these stories and the holders of these artworks, and are working now with Elizabeth and her team to create this digital archive and also to create a digital heritage trail where the stories of different places are combined with these digital renderings that you can see on your phone when you're standing in those places. If we keep going, if we click through pretty quickly, I think, because we're running out of time. So on the other side of the station, we've got Regent's Park Estate. Regent's Park Estate it was built with great aspirations, but then it's sort of gone from these times in the post in the 40s and 50s when there was these real aspirations for higher quality of life for residents. Since then, it's gone through some times where now there's some antisocial behaviour and there are some violent incidents, especially involving young people on the estate. And these incidents get quite a lot of publicity. Of course, they're serious and they're of concern, but it's only a fraction of what happens there. So there's a somewhat negative identity that's held more widely for this estate. And the residents there want to be able to share their stories and more positive identity for the estate. There's certain parts of the estate where you can't get a pizza delivered after 7 p.m, for example, because people don't want to go there. But actually, as you'll see when we work through some of this, activating the public realm, taking narratives and historical narratives as inspiration for the types of activation is something that's being used to rejuvenate the neighbourhood. So there's been lots of walking, talking and mapping. Again, a lot of our work is situated. So people are walking around, sharing examples, being in the place as they share the stories with each other. Then we digitize some of these sites. We map these sites geographically. People talk about what they'd like to see more of and less of in the area, as well as sharing their stories of the area and come up with ideas on how they'd like to see things differently. We keep going. Then, we've tried lots of different ways of gathering these stories. We've had story lines. We've had talkiokis, which are a bit like karaoke, but people pick up the microphone and talk and share their ideas and share their stories. We've got a local radio show that some of our colleagues through Old Diorama Art Centre have been bringing people together, training young people particularly to interview older people in the estate as part of a radio show. They then are making podcasts. So there's lots of different methods that are being used to elicit stories from people in different ways. And then we map out where these stories are. And if we look at the next slide, then we can start looking towards what we're doing with some of these. There's a story tree. So there's this massive tree that we've been exploring the origins of with some experts. This tree is over 350 years old. And the residents have imagined what it is that the tree's seen and what it is the tree could tell you. And so this tree is going to be at the heart of the trail of stories that these residents are pulling together in Regent's Park Estate. We've been iterating and prototyping what a story trail might look like. So the residents want to bring together a trail of stories that joins together different interventions that run north and south and east and west. And the idea is that these installations and these artistic interventions will carry the stories, a bit like the Gilbert Bays did over on the other side of the station in Somerstown. They'll carry the stories at the same time as creating more visibility in the public realm. And so we've prototyped this with residents, sharing some of the stories around a group of dancers, women's Morris dancers that used to be in Cumberland Market, a market square that was built, originally designed because its intention was that it would have a fruit and vegetable market, but it never did. Lots of artist studios that used to be convened in the local area. So many of these stories have been brought forward, and now people are talking about what some of the contemporary examples might be. So, for example, the dancing, the women's Morris dancers, there's now a contemporary group called Remix Dance. And so that idea of juxtaposing the historical example and the current example is something that's sort of driving some of the inspiration for the stories. And if we click forward, sorry, Mick, thank you. This is, again, prototyping different ways of engaging with people. So with the ceramics, this was in the Story Tree site. If we go back one slide, we can see that people were invited to create their own models of a person or an object out of clay that for them summarized the story that they were telling at the same time as making it. And then all of these objects were brought together on this little tree underneath the story tree. And there's a listing of the stories that people told that these objects represented. This is one example of the kinds of installations that were anticipated as part of the story trail. And then if we flick through, that one there was the illuminated market. So this is a market square called Clarence Gardens, which is a bit of a no-go area. Well, not so much a no-go area, not for residents, so that would be unfair. I don't want to propagate these myths of no-go. But at the same time, it's a space that many people didn't feel comfortable going into, especially if you're from outside the area. It used to be a market. Clarence Gardens was designed to be a market square. And so the residents, particularly the community champions who we work with a lot, they set up this illumination market and reinvigorated this idea of the market as a way of activating the space and making it safer. And then if we click through, I think there's we're pretty much, that's examples of that. Really, I guess some of the lessons that we've learnt revolve around the fact that when gathering stories, as our colleague said earlier, it's incredibly important that you have the trust of the people that you're working with. Some of that trust we build through our own through staying in those places and working with those people over a long period of time, not seeking to be extractive, but seeking to be reciprocal. Also, by working with existing organisations. So we don't come in as a new group of people and say, hey, we've got some great new ideas. We work with existing organisations that have already got that trust and already got their own goals in the neighbourhood of surfacing new narratives and restoring identities and updating identities. And we work with and through these organisations when we're doing this kind of work in the neighbourhood.